All right, everybody, let me get your attention. Welcome to this week's War and Peace lecture, which today we were very delighted to be joined by our peace weavers who are going to speak with us about the need for understanding and dialogue to work towards peace in Palestine and in the relationship between Palestine and Israel. And our speakers today are going to be Therese Mughannam, Chuck Sher, and Laure Reichek. And we're going to begin with Therese, who's going to speak with us and introduce a movie, and then she's going to give a presentation, and we'll hear from all three of them, who will talk about the situation in the Middle East, as well as their own thinking and dialogue with one another on these issues over the last few years. So please welcome Therese Mughannam.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Am I doing this right? Okay. Thank you so much for having us again. I don't take this for granted at all because it's hard to get an audience, a young audience, an eager, enthusiastic audience like you, so I'm very grateful that you're here. It's really important for us to understand what is happening around us in our world. I think you would all agree with that. Isolated incidents often reported in the news media do not give the whole story of a situation. There was a fight down the street and somebody got hurt. But what is the story behind that story? Was that a spontaneous, isolated incident, or was there a history of abuse, uncaring, injustice? How often have you heard reported in the last few months that, and we might as well delve right into it, that Hamas is shooting rockets into Israel? It seems they do that for no apparent reason except that they are bad people. The US and Israeli governments say that they are terrorists. But curious why the most important question, in my opinion, is hardly ever asked. Why are they shooting rockets into Israel? The background, the history, the context, all this is absolutely crucial to understanding and deciphering a situation, whether in a relationship between two individuals or two countries. It is so upsetting and disturbing for me as a Palestinian to see how little Americans know about the origin of the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. I have sometimes wondered if they even care to know. But the fact that you are all here today, and this is quite a big crowd, tells me that you are interested and that you do want to know. I thank you for that. I really do. Thank you for your interest, and I hope to share a couple of personal stories with you. So where do we begin a story, and what details do we leave out? Those are two very important questions, in my opinion. Doesn't it all depend on what we want people to believe? Until very recently, the story of the Palestinians was not allowed space in the media, in the US and all over the world. When my family came to America in 1957, we wouldn't dare say anything about what happened to us. We found Americans to be happily ignorant of the facts. They were so taken by what they saw in the Hollywood movie Exodus. How many of you have seen that? Exodus. Yeah, my generation. And of course, the handsome Paul Newman, who almost had me convinced as well, as a child living in San Francisco. I was 10 when my family came to America. And now we know that the movie was commissioned by the then Israeli government to win the hearts and minds of people around the world for their colonial devastation of a beautiful country with a beautiful culture and people. In the late 1950s, it was enough for our neighbors to know that we, this Palestinian family with a bunch of kids, that we came from the Holy Land, the land of the Bible and Jesus and shepherds and olive trees. I was born in Jerusalem, a few months before the United Nations divided Palestine and arbitrarily gave over half of it to the Jewish people, without one word of consultation or negotiation with the indigenous people who had lived there since the time of Jesus. My family, for one, can trace its history back to the 1550s, way before Plymouth Rock. My father's ancestors founded Ramallah, 9 miles north of Jerusalem, around that time. A beautiful story, too long to go into here. But 1948, when Palestine was divided, that changed the course of history for the Palestinians, needless to say. That was 67 years ago, and the Palestinians have not given up their struggle to regain some of their land, identity, culture, and integrity as an independent people, freely seeking their own destiny. I would like to share with you a portion of a film about the destruction of a village and its people in 1948. It's a relatively new film. It's an example of only one village, one of over 400 Palestinian villages destroyed by Israel in 1948. Each village, of course, has its own story. And this is the story. This is called The Stones Cry Out. And it's a story of one village called Birham, a predominantly Christian village in the northern part of what is now Israel. And by the way, this particular film focuses on Christian Palestinians. I am sometimes asked when I converted from Islam. For many years, I lived in the midst of a Muslim world as a Christian, and I have grown to love the Muslim faith and the true expression of it by the Muslims that I know. But when asked about my conversion from Islam, I try to kindly respond with a question. And where did Christianity originate? Do you know? Anybody? Yes? You do know, I'm assuming, right? Okay. It's amazing what kind of answers I get when I ask that question. I say that my family has been Christian since the 1550s that we know of, and that Jesus is a distant cousin of mine. That does it usually. So let's see, and this is about 19 minutes, I think, this portion that I really would like to know. And keep in mind that the reason why I really want to share this with you is it's very important to understand the context in order to put into place what the current situation is, to understand what's really going on today. And this is only one example, as you'll see, of, as I said, over 400 villages. So take it away. Thank you.
There you go. Can you hear that? I can't tell if it's working.
Can you guys hear him?
1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There you go. I can just hold it. My name is Chuck Sher. I'm a member of the Jewish Voice for Peace. The history is multidimensional here, so I'm going to try to briefly go over some of the same stuff that was covered in the film and take it from there. Let's go back 2,000 years ago in the land of Palestine and Israel. The Jewish people were born, actually earlier than that, but they lived in Palestine along with a bunch of other non-Jewish tribes. At that point, the first century AD, they were expelled from the place of their birth by the Romans, who controlled that area, and were dispersed throughout Europe and then the rest of the world. The people who were left, the non-Jewish tribes, became the indigenous people, and them and their ancestors settled the land and lived on it for the next 2,000 years, most of that time as Arabs and largely as Muslims. In the early 20th century, however, there was a movement in Europe among European Jews to try to find a homeland for the Jewish people. The reason for that was because it was not safe for the Jews in Europe, they thought, and they turned out to be right. So the Zionist movement started, and through various efforts increased their presence in Palestine, largely with the help of the British, to the point where it got to the UN partition. The Arabs were not at all happy about the Jewish immigration because they knew that it spelled the end of Arab culture. So from the Arab point of view, it was a complete disaster. But as I will talk later, from the Jewish point of view, they felt they had no choice. But let me just continue with the basic history. In 1948, there was a war. The war ended up with Israel not only controlling the 53% or whatever it was that the UN had allocated for the Jewish state, they ended up with 78%. The remaining 22% was the West Bank and Gaza, and various Arab countries controlled those two parts of historic Palestine until 1967. Now, in 1967, there was another war, and again, Israel was victorious in defeating all of their Arab neighbors simultaneously, and at that point, they militarily occupied the West Bank and Gaza, and so they controlled all of historic Palestine. That military occupation continues until today. And living under occupation is not a good idea. If you were a Palestinian, as Therese wanted to talk about but didn't have time, it's a brutal thing living under occupation. Nonetheless, that has been the situation since 1967. Now, what's wrong with this situation? The basic thing that's wrong with it is that it's illegal and immoral, in my opinion. The illegal part is that the United Nations Charter specifically says that a country cannot increase its territory through force of arms. Israel has signed that charter and is obligated to abide by it. Similarly, it says right in the Fourth Geneva Convention, one of the other bedrocks of international law, that a country is not allowed to export its population into occupied territory. So that's plain English to me, and it says that every inch of every Jewish settlement on Palestinian land is completely illegal. And this is not just my opinion, this is the opinion of the international community, which has stated over and over that the occupation should be negotiated, an end to the occupation should be negotiated by the various parties. And in fact, there have been dozens and dozens of peace proposals put forward to the Israeli government since 1969. And, the Oslo Accords were agreed to, and there was, it seemed like for a few years, some chance of a Palestinian state actually coming about, but largely due to the Israeli intransigence, is that the right word? That did not happen. So the basic story is that Israel is under obligations under international law to cease and desist this illegal occupation, and they do not. They do not. Why? How do they get away with that? Because the United States regularly vetoes any United Nations Security Council resolution that would force Israel to abide by its obligations under international law. So the result of that is that the Israeli government, instead of negotiating as they've been asked to, withdrawal back to the 67 lines, they've continued to force the Palestinians out of more and more land and force them into smaller and smaller enclaves, not unlike what happened with our treatment of the American Indians. One more thing that's important to understand in terms of, listening to the news about what's happening in Gaza is that the two sides are not equal at all militarily, and in fact, Israel is tremendously stronger, something you need to keep in mind. So, nonetheless, if you lived in southern Israel and you saw rockets coming toward you, you would want to be defended. So, what's wrong with the concept of Israel defending itself? I'd like to read you a quick thing from Dr. Naim Atik, who is the head of Sabil, a Palestinian Christian organization. He says, it's important to note that Israel does not have a moral or legal right to claim that it is defending itself so long as it is occupying another state. Let us take the Iraq-Kuwait war as an example. Suppose after Iraq occupied Kuwait, some of the Kuwaitis started firing rockets at Iraqi cities as their way of forcing Iraq to end its illegal occupation. In such a circumstance, would we consider Iraq as having a right to defend itself? Or would we rather see Iraq as the instigator and aggressor? Morally speaking, as long as international law and the United Nations consider Israel as occupying Palestine, Israel is not defending itself, it is defending its occupation, unquote. So, the puzzling question to me as a Jew is why have my people done this? It's obviously wrong, it's illegal, it's immoral, and as you can tell, there's been tremendous suffering as a result of the actions of the Israeli government and the Zionist movement before there was an Israeli government. So why would my people do that? Because we have a strong ethical heritage. If you're not Jewish, maybe that's not clear to you, but if you are Jewish, you know that it was inculcated into us that we are always supposed to take the moral high ground, that we're always supposed to look out for the underdog and never be the oppressor of another people. And so why have we abandoned that in this particular situation? And the answer, in a word, is anti-Semitism. For 2,000 years, the Jewish people have been oppressed, vilified, spat on, ghettoized, and murdered by the Christian world, and not by the Muslim world, by the way, which is a very important distinction. The Jews were allowed to live in the Muslim world as a minority with very little problems. But that's not true of the Jewish people's relation to the Christian world. This, of course, culminated in the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were systematically murdered by the Nazis. Now, after the Holocaust, many Jews in Israel and around the world took the position of never again. Never again would we allow ourselves to be led to the slaughter like sheep. So, what did they do? The Jewish people rallied around Israel. They ignored the moral ambiguities of creating a Jewish homeland on somebody else's land, and the ugly consequences of that are what you saw in this movie here. But it's important to understand that the history of oppression from anti-Semitism that the Jewish people have suffered is the root cause of Israel's actions toward the Palestinians. And it's my belief that any group of people would have done the same given those same circumstances. So to wrap this up, everyone has blood on their hands in this conflict. So instead of pointing the finger at anybody else, I think it's our moral obligation, everybody, to look at their own part in it and to try to do something about that, because in the long run, that's really the place where you can have the most effect. So I would ask the Palestinians to continue their brave and almost exclusively nonviolent struggle against the occupation, but without condemning the Jews as a people, by understanding the effects that 2,000 years of oppression and violence against them have created in the Jewish psyche. I would ask my fellow Jews to forgive the Palestinians for their own acts of violence and to not descend into racism and paranoia, and instead to do the right thing and advocate for abandoning the illegal and immoral occupation of another people's land as the prerequisite for a real and lasting peace. And finally, I would ask my Christian brothers and sisters to never forget their own crucial culpability in this tragedy. Thank you.
Could you give us a little more volume for the movie?
Yeah, thank you. That's better. I'd like to bring up Laure Reichek, who is maybe the prime example I know of a morally upright, ethically solid human being. And Laure will continue with that.
Make sure we get the volume right for her when she's speaking and stuff. That's fine.
You're speaking that thing?
Yeah, just
You can clip it onto your shirt.
I was deeply moved by the movie because being born in France 84 years ago, I suffered the occupation by the German army. And some of the pictures were reminiscent of the feeling of hopelessness that we felt then. Refugees on the road, carrying bundles, children being sick, people dying, all that sort of thing. What I may differ with my friend Chuck on some issues. I believe that I have the right to defend myself against an illegal occupation. I believe that the occupation of any country, anywhere, is illegal. And I believe that the people have the right to defend themselves. My family was very much involved in the resistance movement. We were then, after the war, called heroes, simply because it so happened that the result of the Second World War agreed with the major powers. If not, we would have been called terrorists. I believe that the Palestinian people have a right to defend themselves by any means at their disposal. Granted that throwing rocket into Israel is a very inefficient and not very successful means to defend oneself. But I want them to have that right. And I want to have that right, and I want you to have that right to defend yourself against anyone who would come to dispossess you, to humiliate you continually, to treat you as a second-rate citizen, and ask you for a pass to go from one place to another, to go from your house to your field, as we had to do under German occupation. I want people to have that right. It so happens that Israel is one of the major weapons manufacturer in the world. It so happened that it's an expert on drones and that it sells drones to whoever can buy it. It just so happens that also, after each incursion into Palestinian land, the Israeli sales of weapons go up. You may deduct from that what you will, but what I do detect is that it's good advertising to go bomb or destroy something on Palestinian land. See how good our weapons perform. Whenever there is incursion into somebody else's land, I would advise you to go and ask yourself who benefits. Whether it is the destruction that we have caused throughout the Middle East or elsewhere. We could go back all the way to Vietnam if you want, or even the Second World War. People, and they're not you, benefit from it. You can do a little research. You can find out who the arms merchants are. You can find out how much money they make, even when they give a Nobel Prize to silence their guilty conscience. Nobel was a big weapons manufacturer in Sweden. By the way, Sweden is still a very large weapon manufacturer. You can find all that by doing a little research. Now, there are other things that bother me. For the whole world to live in peace, for each man and woman and child to have enough food, shelter, health care, education, certain things have to happen. And that is for all the leaders of the world, all the congresses, all the parliaments and all this, to recognize that each of you, each of us, have the same needs and the same right. That can only happen through inclusion of every group on the planet. There is no Sunni, no Shia, no Jew, no Muslim, no Christian, no Buddhist, no Hindu. There are people. And it is only when each group is properly represented in a decision-making of each area according to its ecosystems, according to its resources, and it is properly distributed, that we can have peace. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that up to now, the only system that we have been living under is a system in which a very small minority controls all the resources, the products of those resources, of the earth. And we get the crumbs, and sometimes we think that's enough. But we don't live by water alone. We have a right to dream. We have a right to imagine a world in which the privilege I enjoy today are shared by everybody else. We know that is not possible under the system that exists today. And the trouble to come back to Israel is the same problem that you have in the United States, in Western Europe, and what we call the developed countries. They exploit the developing, quote, countries. They do not wish to share. They live under a system where only a few are the chosen few, the chosen people. There is no such thing. We did not choose to be born. We are here. We have rights, and we have the right to demand them. And the Palestinian people, in my view, have been much too tolerant for much too long. They have demanded much too little and done much too little, much too late. Been pushed in a little corner where they cannot make a living, where they cannot go fish in the ocean that's right there, the sea, because they are told by the authorities that they cannot, where they cannot go there because they're told by the authority they cannot. How do you want to live that way? Don't give me a rocket, give me an atom bomb. It's not right. I'm not a Palestinian, but I feel like a Palestinian because I know what it feels to be humiliated on a daily basis because you're this or because you're that. There's no such thing. I'm not this or that. I am a human being. Just like that German soldier with his weapon there, who asked me for my pass so I can go across the street. I am not a Jew. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a Muslim. I'm all of it. And until you understand your common humanity with all the rest of this planet, which is in such trouble, doesn't that make you feel that we're all but one? That you cannot save him without saving yourself? We're in very difficult strait right now. There is a convergence of forces that oblige every human being to think critically, what the heck am I doing here? Am I contributing to the demise of the human species? Am I contributing to the elevation of the human species? Or am I passively sitting by the side, biding my time and saying, well, I can stand a few degrees more, and what the heck if the Palestinians are dying over there, or it's a Syrian today, or the Iraqi tomorrow? It doesn't concern me. Oh, yes, it does. You just wait and see. It does concern you. I cannot have any rights that are worth their name unless somebody else has them too, and has to include all of us. And we must fight for that. If only you're interested in money, you're paying for it too. You're paying for all that destruction. You're paying for all that oppression, for that humiliation. You're paying for it. The money that we give Israel, 75%, they must use to buy weapons from us, which they sell back or they use. Did you know that? That's a fact. So, which side are you on, folks? Which are you on? Thank you.
There's no sense trying to follow that act. Laure, my mentor, my friend. I was going to talk more about stories of people that I personally know and have recently seen who have a history and can remember what happened to them, and just like what we saw in the movie. But I don't think I'm going to do that. I was just at Palestine Day in San Francisco on Sunday, and I saw one of my cousins, a few years older than me. And each time I see her, I remember her story. See, I was too young. When my family fled, I was an infant, so I don't remember any of this stuff. I've learned it through the stories that people have told me, that they're telling of their own stories. I believe it's important to know about the suffering of other people, even if we can't do anything about it. It's important for us to hold it in ourselves, in our hearts, in our awareness, to carry it with them. And so I saw my cousin, and I'll tell you real quickly her story, which she remembers as an 8-year-old in 1948. The soldiers coming into her little town, little village where they lived, near Jaffa on the Mediterranean coast, near Tel Aviv. And her mother shook her, wake up, we have to get in the buses, there's going to be trouble in our town, and we need to go quickly. And she was frightened, of course, an 8-year-old child. And so she said, I was trying to find my slippers, and I couldn't find my slippers. And so she went outside and saw that all the buses, there were several other buses taking everybody in their neighborhood into who knows where. They were told that there was going to be bombing, and so they were going to take them to safety. Anyway, long story, but basically they got on the bus and they traveled and traveled and traveled in the middle of the night, dark, no street lights, no flashlights, no nothing, no water, no blankets. Suddenly the buses stopped and everybody got off, and then the buses left. And there they were. These clusters of families with children in their pajamas and no slippers. And that's what my cousin remembers. And so to hold that, that it's, people suffer, and it's not just the Palestinians who suffer. We need to look around in our own county as well. And my challenge to you as young people, with open minds and open hearts, is to really look around you and see what you can do. Sometimes it's within your own community, in your own neighborhood, in your own family, to help those who are suffering, to lighten their load. Because, I think Laure said it, that's the measure of our own humanness. If we can feel the suffering of other people. And unfortunately, there's a lot of suffering going on in our world today. So that's my challenge to you. I would like to talk to you about some of the things I brought, which might interest you. And please feel free to come up, and I hope I have enough for everybody. But a great book, if you're interested in this topic, about what happened in 1948. Again, not because of any other reason except that it's important to know the context of a problem. You can't fix something that you don't know how it started, most of the time, So this is a book written by an Israeli historian about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. More horror stories. It's really difficult reading emotionally for me, and I haven't even read the whole thing. But if you are interested, you want to do some research, this is a good one.
Who's the author?
The author is Ilan Pappé, I-L-A-N-P-A-P-P-E, and he's an Israeli historian. This map card is one of the best visuals I know about that kind of focuses the problem visually. And you can see that on the extreme right of the picture, the green is what Palestine looked like when I was born. And what it looks like on the extreme over here, that would be, anyway, it's over there. That's what it looks like today. And then you wonder why people are so upset, why the rockets are flying. Now, I don't believe in violence against innocent civilians, it's not the way to solve problems, in my opinion. But I do understand the frustration and the absolute depression, hopelessness, that especially the young ones, people your age, because it's their world that we are destroying, their future. So take one of these, put it up as a reminder of what that struggle is all about. There's other things. You can look at some of the other things I brought for you. If it interests you, take one. And lastly, there's a lecturer is coming from Israel, and she is been recommended highly, and actually my little group in Santa Rosa is inviting her to speak on November 3rd, 2014, that's this year, at 7 p.m. in Santa Rosa. And her vision is really of a secular New Jerusalem. She obviously doesn't agree with a lot of what her, the Israeli government's policies towards the Palestinians. And, the whole thing of anti-Semitism that Chuck brought up, it's a big one. And I want you to remember that, and I really want you to take this in the right way. Anti-Semitism did not, the Palestinians I know are not anti-Semitic. I'm a Semite. As an Arab, as a Palestinian person, I'm a Semite. So the anti-Semitism is really European, American, but it's not. If there is, and I think that there is, hatred of Jews in the Arab world or in Palestine, it's because of what they have done to us. When I was a kid, as a Christian, I was, we're supposed to love our enemies, but we're not, this is how I grew up. They took our land, they took our homes, and so they're not our friends, and we stay away from them. So, but this anti-Semitism thing there's something different and deeper and more sinister about it. And another friend of mine who is also Jewish, David Glick, wrote this piece, which I think is wonderful, about anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is wrong. Criticizing Israel is not. It's a good piece. You're welcome to have it. Okay, questions?
Let me invite you guys to, why don't you guys all sit there in the chairs? And I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. We'll take some questions now. I just want to say to all of you, what inspires me about these three, they come speak for us every year, is their willingness to share their stories and their perspectives. They remind me every year how we all come from different wisdom traditions. And we look back to those wisdom traditions to try and find answers. A lot of people through faith, a lot of people through reading, a lot of people through family and culture. And you try to make sense of the world. And that's what's happening all around the world. People are trying to make sense of what's happening to them, some forces that are much larger than the village or the town where they live in, including you guys sometimes, right? I also just want to say, if you want to have conversations about this, our intern Caitlin back there has created a Facebook page for War and Peace, and some other things too, Twitter, and oh, you're there. Okay, sorry, I have to throw things. Twitter, we have Instagram as well. If you like social media and you want to have conversations, because I think this is a really great invitation to share those stories that our panel is talking about, stories of ideas. And they're also opening up a lot of questions today that we'll address in later lectures. Rashmi Singh, who's sitting here in the front row, she's going to speak with us later on this semester about the United Nations and why it does or doesn't work in some of the ways that Sher was talking about. Also, Rashmi taught in this program for many years, and she's an expert on comparative religion and how understanding the wisdom traditions around the world is really important, understanding how rooted people are sometimes in their identities and how those things affect conflict. So this is an invitation to really reflect on one particular issue in the Middle East. But we're going to talk a lot. I love what Chuck said about, what did you say? If we don't have a rule for everyone, we don't have a rule for anyone. If you're going to have international rule, you got to have it for everybody. We're going to have a whole talk just on that. We need to, Chuck, Kirk Boyd's going to come and talk with us about the need to have an international Bill of Rights that's good for everybody. You may not be in favor of that, but you'll see some of the ideas that are coming up in the rest of the class will be branching off some of these things today. So now that they have their seats, and I'll shut up and let you guys ask them some questions.
Any questions, anybody?
seems to be such huge support for Israel in the U.S., at least among politicians?
Well, the joke goes that there are two Zionist-occupied territories in the world. One is Palestine, and the other is the U.S. Congress. And you know, it's actually not a joke. I went to speak to our then representative Lynn Woolsey one day to ask her to support a piece of legislation that would benefit the Palestinian people, and she said, "I'd like to, but I can't do it because my Jewish constituents would have my head." That's what she said. The Jewish lobby is very organized, and you know, not to make a conspiracy thing out of it, they have the right to organize, and they're good at it. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of motivation, and that's the way it is. But you know, sometimes that goes over the line into intimidation, and I can't support that. But you know, historically, again, you have to look at the history of it. After World War II, after the Holocaust, the Western world was horrified when they saw what happened in Hitler's death camps. And so anti-Semitism became verboten, to use the German word. It was not socially acceptable to do that anymore. And so supporting Israel was one way that people had to show that they weren't anti-Semitic. And so that's largely how that happened, and it hasn't changed all that much since then. Basically because people don't know the Palestinian side of the question, and so, but they know that anti-Semitism is wrong. It's already been proved to be horrific, and therefore people support Israel just because of that.
Laure, did you want to respond to that? No, please. Yes.
Question. It didn't be any of you, actually. So I think it's really interesting that you brought up how the United Nations originally carved basically a nation state out of Palestine for Israel. Do you feel that it's kind of guilt from the European nations to do so, to also not be portrayed that you know, we're not anti-Semitic? Because I know in Europe now there's a rise of ultra-nationalism and xenophobia. I want to know what you guys think. Did you guys hear that question? Could you guys repeat it? Maybe could you repeat it more?
You can repeat it since it's your question, please.
So basically, Israel was carved out of Palestine by the United Nations. Is that correct?
Yes.
So Israel was carved out of Palestine by the United Nations, and my question is, do you feel it may have been out of guilt for what had happened in Germany? And I back up that claim only because it seems that today there's a rise of ultranationalism and xenophobia in Europe. So what do you guys think about that?
Oops. Something fell off the machine, but it still works. It's just its hand. I think you're right. There's a great deal of guilt that was involved there. But I think there's more to it than that. I think there's long-term geopolitics. I think that the major powers were very happy to create a state of Israel where it did, because there were other possibilities explored at the time. Using ancient history, biblical history, was a useful tool. But I think that what the major powers were contemplating is a quasi-capitalistic system of control in a very rich area of the world, the Middle East. We needed an aircraft carrier to really keep a hand on the resources of the area, a proxy state. So definitely there was guilt for having allowed 6 million Jews to be destroyed. No doubt about that. Did we feel that about Native Americans or other peoples? No. And that is why I have this conspiracy theory that there was more to it than that. That the positioning of Israel, where it was, rather than the northeast corner of Russia, called Kamchatka, that has a mild climate, that had been considered at one time by the Zionist movement, and other places in the world where land could have been bought to establish a state for the Jews. I think there was a long-term geopolitical interest by the major power to establish in the Middle East a non-Arab, non-Muslim state for future control. That's my view, and I may very well be wrong.
Noam Chomsky says that the function of the U.S. in the Middle East is to be the U.S.'s cop on the block. I think there's some truth in that.
But I think also at the time, in 1948, right? But now Israel proclaimed itself a state. I mean, it wasn't proclaimed, it just took that upon itself and proclaimed itself a state in 1948. I think too there was the element of wanting to get rid of the Jewish problem in Europe. I read that somewhere, and it, the borders were basically closed to the Jews who were fleeing, the European and American borders. And so, go to Palestine, so that I think added to that problem. That's my opinion. Questions? How did this feel for you? How was the film for you? Was it shocking? Was it new? Was it, wow, I can't believe that happened. There you are, yes.
I mean, I just thought it was kind of sad that, people, Jewish descent, like Israeli people would do this, Palestine, when, historically the same thing happened to them in the past, and that they would repeat it, so it's just kind of, disappointing to see that.
That's very sad for me too. And I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but we know in our own lives, I certainly know it in mine as a parent, that if I don't heal myself, I inflict all of my stuff, all my uglies on other people around me, especially my kids. And I think that someday, hopefully, at least it's my hope and prayer, that the Jewish people will take on and deal with what happened to them at the hand of what you said about Christian Europe. Because it's huge, it's not small, it's huge. And I don't know if they've dealt with it yet, so it's obviously being inflicted on others who happen to be around. Yes?
What do you feel we can do to contribute to getting these efforts known, getting the general history of Palestine known so that more people can support Palestine's cause? What can you do as students?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. That's a very important question. Number one, in my opinion, we can all respond to this, is learn about what's going on, educate yourself, There's so much stuff on the internet, and I know you're all in that world. So there's a lot of good stuff written in books, like I pointed out, but you can find so much good stuff just by going on the internet. And educate yourself, and go to different sources. Don't read just one source, because you want to get a balanced picture as much as possible. The other thing right now, actually, that is happening that I'm part of is a global boycott. A global boycott, just like we did in South Africa. You know, when there was apartheid, the regime there. And it was only through a boycott and divestment and sanction effort that you know, that situation changed. And there is right now the same kind of effort happening. It's just beginning to take off in the United States. It's been going on for several years in Europe and other places. And so, yeah, we have to, you know, we've tried everything else. I'm 67 years old. This has been going on for all of my life, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. So we have to force the situation to some kind of a just resolution for both sides. We have to force that, and the only way we know how is to do it economically. And that goes back to what Laure was talking about, you know, where the money is. So, yeah, you know, read the labels. Educate yourself about that, you know, where things are made, and don't buy them.
By the way, a lot of cosmetics are made in Israel. And L'Oreal, the French cosmetic house, has a lot to do and gives a lot of money to Israel. So, yeah, do look at the small label in the back of the hand cream or whatever it is that you're using. Where is it coming from? Who you know, who's benefiting? So you're going to have to really think each time you buy something. Who is being exploited and who's benefiting from the sale of that product, which most of the time we don't need anyway. But should you buy something, just look at it. And there is also a list on the internet of all the companies, not just Caterpillar Tractor, but a lot of companies are doing business with Israel and giving money so that they can do more harm with it. So we don't want to be complicit or collaborating with that, do we?
And one final thing, you know, the basic thing you have to do is educate yourself. You have to know what happened and why, and that's something you can do on your own. Although there's an event coming up this Sunday in Petaluma at Walnut Park called the Progressive Festival. Jim Hightower will be speaking, Maria Muldar will be performing, a bunch of other things, including Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb, who will be discussing these very same issues. So please come out, Walnut Park, free from 12 to 5 this Sunday.
And if you want to go on the internet and learn more about BDS, Boycott, Divest, Sanction, Google BDS. And there's a website called whoprofits.org, I believe it is. So educate yourself. And thank you so much. You've been an amazing group of very listening people.